Canzer. This morning we are just a few days, 2 days before the start of Pesach, and our discussion will focus around how we should be looking at Passover, Pesach celebrations this year in light of the COVID-19 situation. And I thought, Rabbi, that it would be a good opportunity to open up our discussion this morning with some commentary from you about an understanding of how this year's Passover celebration can be thought of and understood in a different light from what an original, or maybe what we thought about Passover in previous times.
Good morning, Brahm. Thank you once again for hosting this. You know, the question that you bring up is really poignant, because this year I believe that the Passover Seder is brought to life in real time. In other words, it more uniquely resonates this year than it does in years past. As many feel that they are living in a modern day plague, on top of which we are actually doing the unthinkable and limiting our seders, excluding even the closest of family members. You know, medieval and contemporary Jewish history teaches us that even in times when our celebrations were curtailed, Pesach was in some shape or form nonetheless observed. I want to tell you a little story. I have a young man who went through a conversion process here at Shaarei Tzedek about 3 years ago. And each year he has joined our seders, both the synagogue or in my home. He lives on his own. And he called me up last week and he said to me, Rabbi, what am I supposed to do this year? How am I supposed to celebrate the Seder? I'm going to be on my own, and my mother's here. She came to visit and now she can't leave. So it's just the two of us. How are we going to celebrate? Particularly since my mother's not of the Jewish faith, he said. And I said to him, you know, this is the perfect chance for you not only to enact out the Seder, but to be a teacher of our traditions as you walk through the Seder, and be a learning experience for your mother to actually feel what Jews have been doing for the last 3,500 years in recognizing our independence and our freedom from slavery to freedom. And he felt really good about that. And I've worked with him to put together a little Seder for him to follow and thus teach his mother. So we're having to find very different ways of doing our Seders this year. And we mustn't just look at it as a negative. We've got to try and find positive ways in which to celebrate.
Okay. What would you recommend as a generalization to people as an introduction? Every so often I'll come across something, I'll read an article that suggests something every year should be added for discussion, especially around the Seder table, and trying to bring more relevance and more understanding and appreciation of Jewish identity, the concept of freedoms that we enjoy, the confidence that we feel in life because we feel a continuation of the covenant that began with the first Passover so many thousands of years ago. What introduction would you recommend this year? And maybe is it something that we need to continue with in future years? Is there something that we should be appreciating or understanding in a different way this year, especially because of the current situation?
You know, I'm reminded of growing up as a little boy. It was just at the time that there was the Refusnik movement trying to get the Jews out of Russia. And at that point, I remember very clearly having inserted into the Seders not only prayers but also we would put aside a matzah. We would, instead of saying this is the bread of affliction, which is part of what we say in our Seder, we would hold up a matzah and says, this represents the affliction of the Jews of the Soviet Union who are not free, etc., etc. And I got to tell you, one of the things that Jews for thousands of years have done very masterfully, and that is weaving a meaningful biblical narrative into our current situation. And I feel very much that we should be doing the same this year, recognizing the situation that we're in. And I would venture to say that it's something that should be continued for generations to come, remembering what made Pesach so unique this year and what we learned from it for the future.
Okay. I wonder if we could go to a question about the concept of plague, the concept of what was being done to the people that were leaving Egypt and forming Judaism at the beginning of the formation of Judaism, and the concept of nature, God sending messages to the Egyptians, to Pharaoh, and to the people at the time, and whether this is a message from God, kind of a continuation of what we had spoken about the last time, that we were talking about the existential threat. And I thought something that stuck with me was your confidence, and God cleared that up a long time ago in your mind, that was a fundamental message that is repeated over and over again. There was a flood, Noah, the ark, and God promised never to destroy humanity. And that belief is part of the central core of what we as Jews hold. And it has carried us forward. And even in these days, and the news is starting to get better today. This is April 6th. Indications are that there's positive information coming out that what we're doing is resulting in improvement in medical treatment, and we're a little bit more hopeful today than perhaps we were a week ago. But to go back to the point, how did God communicate in your mind? How is it different than nature? And what's the message and understanding that we should take away today?
Well, for me, part of the brilliance and magnificence of the plagues that God wrought upon the Egyptians, they were not what I would call apocalyptic, fire and brimstone raining down from heaven and annihilating all the enemies like one would see in Hollywood movies. But it was actually a manipulation of nature's forces, and thus demonstrating to the children of Israel and to the Egyptians, of course, that the God of Israel is the only God that has the power to manipulate nature that was put in place, and thus beware that the forces of nature can be manipulated. They have to live within the specifications of which God created for them, just like humanity has to live within its own format and not overstep it. Today, what we're seeing is with this epidemic, it was definitely some bizarre happening in nature. We're being told by scientists and physicians, and I'm probably the least informed to be able to give any form of opinion, but we're told that somehow this virus jumped from animal to human. But it didn't do so because God decided that that's what had to happen, which is counter to what happened in Egypt. But it did so because I believe man abused the abilities and the powers that God had given him. So there is a clear sign there that you've got the manipulation of nature. One was a force of God, and the other, I believe, was the abuse of man.
Yeah, I get that message. It's my interpretation also. I think it goes to the heart of uh, laws and kosher, what you should be doing and how you handle animals and um, those kinds of ideas. And people familiar with what I'm talking about will know what I mean right away. Um, the information that we have at this point is that none of this would have happened if people followed laws of kosher, of not doing what was done. Maybe it's stretching things too far, but we'll see as things unfold and the information. I'm sure there'll be lots of analysis afterwards to figure out why this happened and how this break from the world of animals to humans took place. Maybe we should bring this to a conclusion with a positive statement that can lead us forward in terms of traditional lessons that we can recover, that we can think about the future in a more positive way. For me, I have to say that this will be a special Passover. I remember all of the Passovers. They kind of come together for me as one memory. Everybody that I've ever seen at all of the Passovers, they're all there. And this is going to be just an addition to that cumulative connection. But I feel at the same time that we need to learn something more deep, learn to understand this in a very important way, because I think life will be different. Passovers will be different. And I look forward to the celebration, God willing, next year when we can do this in a more traditional, more normal way. So go ahead.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that because, you know, on Passover, we are supposed to act out the experience of the Exodus as though we were actually present. For example, we don't just talk about the bitterness that was experienced. We actually eat the maror. So there's actually an active role there. And I hope that celebrating Passover after weeks of confinement to our homes will help relate more deeply to the Haggadah's narrative of oppression and liberation. But saying that, I also actually challenged each and every one of my members after Passover to send me an email of how they were able to take their current situation with respect to Passover and look at it through a positive lens and share that with me. Because I think if we look hard enough, and we are prepared to put aside what was, we can create some very beautiful what is. And that I think is very important.
Right, I agree, thank you. So let's conclude today's thought. We have been discussing the current Passover connection with current situation. My name is Brahm Canzer. I've been talking with Rabbi Alan Bright of the Shara Zedek Adult Learning Program. Shalom.
Shalom. Thank you.